The first wave hit at 3:47, and Commander Cale Drennick watched 6 transports die before anyone on the bridge could speak. The Varath had punched through the outer cordon like it was tissue. 300 killers, each one a cathedral of barbed alloy and living armor, dropped out of fold space directly inside the convoy's formation and opened fire without hailing, without warning, without the courtesy of a single demand. Transport 14, 4,000 civilians, mostly children from the Meridian colony, broke apart in a bloom of white-hot debris that scattered across the viewport like burning snow. Transport 8 ruptured along her spine. Transports 21, 22, 26, and 30 disintegrated in a chain so fast the tactical display couldn't separate the icons before they went dark. 6 transports, 19,000 people, 43 seconds. Drennick gripped the edge of his command console until his knuckles cracked. All ships, emergency scatter protocol Theta-9. Get the transports behind the screen. Now. The ISV Halberd shuddered beneath him. She was old. 47 years in active service, her hull scarred from 3 wars and 2 refits that never quite finished. A Forge-class heavy cruiser, 1,100 meters of battered alloy and outdated weapons systems that the Terran Strategic Navy had pulled out of mothball reserve 6 weeks ago because there was nothing else left. The Varath had already burned through the 4th Fleet at Harkin's Gate, 41 warships gone in 9 hours. The 9th was shattered. The 12th hadn't reported in 11 days. What remained of humanity's naval power was scattered across 40 systems in fragments too small to matter. And what Drennick had this battered cruiser, 2 frigates, a destroyer with half its weapons offline, and 9 armed transports converted from cargo haulers, was all that stood between the Varath hunting packs and the 340,000 civilians crawling toward the Bastion Line. 41 hours. That was the number that lived behind Drennick's eyes like a coal. The convoy needed 41 hours to reach the Bastion Line, where the fixed orbital batteries, the deep space minefield, and whatever reinforcements command had scraped together could hold anything. 41 hours at the convoy's maximum speed of 0.3 subliminal. Every hour shorter meant fewer dead. Every hour longer meant the Varath brought more hunters. Commander, 2nd wave incoming. Lieutenant Vassara's voice carried from the sensor station, steady and precise, which was the only reason Drennick didn't lose his composure entirely. Fold signatures 6 contacts. Correction 8. 800 killers dropping in at bearing 270, range 140,000 kilometers and closing. 8 more. 3 had already cost him 6 transports and 19,000 lives. Time to the Bastion Line. 40 hours, 12 minutes at current speed. 40 hours. He had 40 hours to keep a convoy of unarmed civilians alive against a species that hunted for the joy of it. The Varath were not conquerors. They did not want territory, resources, trade routes, or submission. The Galactic Concordance had spent 2 centuries cataloging alien species, and the Varath entry was the shortest and the worst, apex predators, a species that had evolved past every biological need except the hunt itself. Their ships were grown, not built, semi-living organisms of layered chitin and metallic bone wrapped around weapons that fired superheated biological projectiles, each one a cluster of organic compounds sealed in a chitinous shell that could melt through warship armor on impact. Their tactics were pack behavior, refined over millennia. They circled. They tested. They found the weakest point and struck, and they did not stop until everything was dead. They had never hunted humans before. Not seriously. Earth was too far from their historical migration lanes, too unimportant, too small. But the collapse of the hegemony border 3 months ago had opened a corridor, and the Varath packs had poured through like water through a cracked hull. Suddenly 4 billion humans across 19 colonies were directly in the path of the largest hunting migration in recorded galactic history. The Concordance had sent a message, not ships, not weapons, not volunteers, a message. Drennick had memorized it because the cold fury it sparked was the only thing that kept the exhaustion from swallowing him. We advised the Terran systems to evacuate to behind the Bastion Line. The Concordance lacks the mandate to intervene in Verath migratory patterns. We extend our sympathy. Sympathy? 340,000 civilians on transports built for cargo, not speed, running from biological killing machines, and the galaxy sent sympathy. Helm, bring us to heading 185. Put the halberd between the convoy's trailing edge and those contacts. Signal the Ardent and the Keen to take flanking positions. Tell the Morrigan to hold center screen. The Ardent was a frigate. The Keen was a frigate. The Morrigan was a destroyer with 4 of her 8 weapon mounts sitting dark and dead. Drennick was sending a cruiser and 3 crippled escorts against 11 hunter-killers, any one of which outmassed the halberd by a factor of 3. But the transports could not run faster, and there was nowhere else to go, and Drennick had made a promise to the 19 civilian captains in this convoy that he would get them to the line. He intended to keep it or die in the attempt. Those were the only 2 outcomes he was prepared to accept. The halberd swung around, her old engines groaning through the hull plating with a resonance that Drennick felt in his boots, a deep, grinding vibration that meant the reactor was pushing harder than the maintenance log said it safely could. Chief Engineer Thomas had told him, quietly, over coffee that tasted like recycled coolant, that the reactor had maybe 70 hours of hard burn left before the containment seals started to weep. 70 hours. He needed 40. The margin was smaller than it sounded. Hard burn meant combat maneuvers, not steady cruise, and every sharp turn and emergency acceleration ate into that reserve faster than the readouts tracked. Weapons free. All batteries target the lead hunter-killer. Concentrated fire. I want every rail and every lance on the same point. The halberd opened up. 47-year-old magnetic accelerators hurled tungsten slugs at a fraction of light speed, their reports shuddering through the hull like a drumbeat. The lance batteries, retrofitted during the second refit, the only modern weapons on the ship, fired coherent energy beams that cut through the dark like surgical incisions. The lead hunter-killer took the full broadside across its forward quarter, and Drennick watched the impacts bloom across the creature's hull in cascading flashes. The chitin cracked. Not much. A few plates peeled away, trailing biological fluid that froze instantly in vacuum into dark crystals. The hunter-killer shuddered, adjusted its trajectory by rolling its entire body like a living thing favoring a bruised limb, and kept coming. Damage assessment on the target. Surface ablation only, Commander. Its regeneration matrix is already closing the wounds. Estimated repair time, 40 seconds. 40 seconds. They pounded it with everything a Forge-class cruiser could deliver, and the damage would be healed before Drennick could finish a sentence. Maintain fire. Switch to rotating target pattern. Cycle through the lead 3 contacts every 15 seconds. I want them irritated and uncertain, not comfortable in reading our arcs. The bridge crew executed without question or hesitation. That was the thing about the halberd's crew. Half of them were reservists pulled from civilian jobs 6 weeks ago. The other half were veterans from ships that no longer existed, transferred to the halberd because she was the only hull with room. All of them understood what this was. This was not a battle they could win. This was a delay, a rearguard. Every minute they held the Verath's attention was a minute the transports gained toward the line. 39 hours, 41 minutes. The first hunter-killer reached engagement range and fired. A biological projectile, a mass of superheated organic compound wrapped in a dense chitinous shell, roughly the size of a ground vehicle, slammed into the halberd's port armor. The ship lurched hard enough to throw unsecured objects across the bridge. Drennick grabbed his console as the deck tilted 15 degrees, and he heard the deep, tearing sound of hull plating giving way somewhere below decks, a sound like a giant ripping sheet metal with its hands. Damage report. Port armor section 7 compromised. Hull breach on decks 14 through 16. Loss of atmosphere, those sections venting. Auto-sealing bulkheads engaging now. No casualties, those sections were pre-evacuated per your standing order. Drenick had ordered every non-essential section of the outer hull evacuated, and sealed 12 hours before the first Varath contact appeared. The halberd was running with a skeleton crew in the outer compartments and everyone else packed into the armored core around the bridge, engineering and medical. It meant he had no damage control teams in the outer hull. It meant breaches would stay breached, armor would stay destroyed, and the ship would slowly lose her protective shell section by section. But it also meant his people survived the hits that were coming, and they were coming. Ardent reports engagement. 2 hunter-killers circling her position, testing her firing arcs. Tell Captain Solis to keep them occupied but not to overextend. If she takes critical damage, she falls back behind the convoy screen immediately. She does not play hero. He knew Solis wouldn't fall back. She was 26 years old, commanding her first ship, a frigate with a crew of 80, and she had the same look in her eyes that Drenick had seen in every young officer who understood the arithmetic. The arithmetic was simple and merciless. If the escorts fell, the transports died. All of them. 321,000 remaining people, families, children, engineers, teachers, doctors, colonists who had built lives on worlds that the Varath were now burning through, would die screaming in the vacuum because a pack of biological predators thought the killing was sport. The Varath did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They did not stop. 38 hours, 9 minutes. Drenick had fought in 2 wars before this one. The border skirmish with the Kethani Reach, where the enemy had been rational, and the ceasefire came after 11 days of measured escalation and back-channel diplomacy. The siege of Blackwater Station, where an automated defense grid had gone rogue and had to be dismantled ship by ship over 4 weeks of careful, methodical work. Both times, there had been an opponent who could be reasoned with, outthought, or at least predicted. The Varath were predictable only in their hunger. They circled, tested, found weakness, and struck. If you were strong enough to hurt them, they pulled back and waited for you to tire. If you showed any gap, any moment of reduced fire, any section of the screen left thin, they pounced with everything. So Drenick did the only thing he could think of. He made the halberd look stronger than she was. He ordered the ship to advance toward the Varath formation. Not away, not to the side, directly toward 11 hunter-killers, engines at full military power, every weapon on the ship firing. The Ardent and the Keen took flanking positions, adding their fire, and the Morrigan laid down suppressive shots from behind. And for a moment the combined output of the 4 warships created a wall of kinetic and coherent energy fire that lit up the void like a second sun rising in the dark. The Varath hunter-killers split. Pack instinct, they recognized a charge, and they responded by fanning out, circling wide, looking for the flanks. It bought time. 3 minutes, maybe 4, while the predators reassessed the threat profile and communicated in whatever chemical-electrical language their semi-living ships used. Convoy speed. 0.3 subluminal, holding steady. Can we push them to 0.35? Transport 7's engines are already redlining, Commander. Transport 12 has a cascading coolant issue. Her chief engineer is working it, but it's getting worse, not better. If we push harder, we risk losing propulsion on 2 ships. 2 ships, 11,000 people between them. Hold at 0.3, we do this the hard way. The hard way meant fighting for every single minute across 40 hours of void. The Varath circled back at 412, and this time they came from 3 directions simultaneously, above the ecliptic plane, below it, and directly ahead in a classic pack convergence designed to overwhelm a single defensive position. The halberd took 2 hits to the dorsal hull that cratered entire sections of armor plating, and the Keen took a glancing blow that tore away her primary sensor array in a spray of sparks and torn metal. Keen reports loss of primary sensors. She's blind on her entire starboard quarter, operating on backup only, reduced range and resolution. Move the Keen to the convoy's port side. She covers what she can see. Halberd covers the blind spot. Adjust formation to compensate. The formation tightened. The transports huddled closer together, their civilian captains following the military escorts the way prey animals cluster around their strongest members, and Drennick watched the tactical display as the Verath hunter-killers settled into a wide, patient orbit around the convoy. Circling. Testing. 11 predators watching 28 prey with 4 damaged guards. 36 hours, 52 minutes. The second full engagement came at 500. A hunter-killer dove straight at Transport 3, a fast, targeted strike designed to test the escort response time and firing arcs. Drennick had anticipated it. The targeting pattern was the same one a pack of land predators would use: probe the guard, measure the reaction, calculate the gap. The halberd was already turning before the Verath committed its dive, and a full broadside caught the hunter-killer across its ventral surface at close range. This time, the damage found purchase. One of the lance beams struck a joint in the chitin where 2 armor plates met imperfectly, a biological seam, a growth line where the living hull hadn't fully fused. The beam punched through into the creature's interior, and something inside ruptured. The hunter-killer spasmed, its entire body contorting, its propulsion wavering, and veered off sharply, trailing a stream of dark, viscous fluid that crystallized behind it like a wound leaving a scar across space. It did not die, but it retreated to the outer ring of the pack's orbit, and the other hunters gave the halberd a noticeably wider berth for the next 40 minutes. "Good shooting, Lieutenant Vassara." "Thank you, Commander." A beat of silence. "It won't work twice. They catalog wounds. Next engagement they'll protect that seam." She was right. The Verath learned. Every engagement taught them the escorts firing arcs, response times, weapon capabilities, and targeting preferences. By the 3rd hour, Drennick could see the adaptation in their approach vectors. They knew exactly how fast the halberd could turn, exactly how far the lance batteries could reach before coherence degraded, and exactly which transport was the slowest. Transport 12, the one with the coolant issue. It was falling behind the formation by 100 meters every minute, a gap that widened like a wound, and the Verath had noticed. Drennick pulled the Morrigan back to cover 12's position. The destroyer's 4 working weapon mounts were barely enough to discourage a probing run, but the presence of any warship, even a half-crippled one, made the hunters hesitate. Predator calculus: was the prey worth the risk of injury? For now, the answer was no. That calculation could change at any moment. 34 hours, 11 minutes. The first catastrophic loss of the rearguard came in the 5th hour. A hunter-killer made a feint at the convoy's leading edge, drawing the halberd and the Ardent forward in a defensive surge, and while they were committed and their sterns were turned, 2 hunters dove at the trailing transports from directly below, the angle the Keen couldn't cover since losing her sensors. Transport 9 took a direct hit amidships. The biological projectile punched through her thin commercial hull like a blade through cloth, and the ship broke in 2. The halves spun apart, shedding atmosphere and debris and bodies. Drennick watched 12,000 people die in the time it took to draw one breath. The bridge was silent. Someone, Ensign Korath at the communications console, made a small, involuntary sound. Not a word. A sound that might have been the beginning of a name, or a prayer, or nothing at all. "Maintain formation," Drennick said. His voice was flat. It had to be. If he let anything into his voice, grief, rage, the scream that was building behind his sternum, the bridge would crack, and if the bridge cracked, everyone died. Command was a mask you wore until you could afford to take it off, and he could not afford it for 34 more hours. "Helm, bring us back to screening position. Signal all transports to close the gap where 9 was." 12,000 people on Transport 9. Added to the 19,000 from the first wave. 31,000 dead in 5 hours, and they had 34 hours left. The Verath circled wider after the kill, satisfied for the moment. That was the pattern: strike, feed on the chaos and confusion, pull back to digest the victory. Biological behavior. Drennick hated that he understood it, hated that he could predict when they would be hungry again. He pulled up the convoy roster on his personal display and scrolled through the manifests, trying not to read names he would never forget. Transport 3, families from Meridian Prime, 7,200 souls. Transport 5, evacuees from Port Anchar, mostly elderly, 3,800 souls. Transport 7, the crew manifest listed a school, an entire school, 340 children, their teachers, and a handful of parents who had sprinted to the launch pad in the last minutes before the Verath reached the colony. Transport 12, hospital patients, some in stasis pods, some conscious and terrified and asking nurses questions that had no good answers. He closed the display. Reading it wouldn't save anyone. Fighting would. "Thomas," he said over the engineering channel, "give me an honest assessment. Can you get the railguns up to a faster cycling rate? The standard rate isn't penetrating before their regeneration closes the damage." The chief engineer's voice came back, rough and carrying the particular tiredness of a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. "I can overclock the magnetic coils by about 15%. We'll hit harder and faster, but the coils will burn out at that rate. You'll lose the railguns entirely in, I'd estimate 18 hours of sustained fire. We need 40 hours. Then you'll be fighting the last 22 with lances only. And Commander, those coils can't be rebuilt in the field. Once they fuse, they're done." Drennick did the math. The lances could genuinely hurt the Verath. They had proven that. The railguns could annoy them, make them flinch, force evasive maneuvers. In 22 hours with lances only, the difference between a flinching hunter and a confident one might be the margin between losing 1 transport and losing 5. "Hold the overclock in reserve. I'll call for it when we need it most." "Understood, and Commander, the reactor. It's holding for now. The 70 hours I gave you was worst-case projection. We'll make 40, I'll make sure of that." "Thank you, Thomas." 29 hours, 33 minutes. The Verath attacked again at 8:14, and this assault was different. Coordinated, purposeful. 6 hunter-killers in a pincer formation, 3 from each flank converging on the center of the convoy at maximum speed. This was not a probe. This was a kill run. Drennick had 30 seconds to react. All escorts execute hammer pattern. Halberd takes the port group, Ardent and Keen take starboard. Morrigan holds center screen around the transports. Hammer was a desperation play. It meant the escorts abandoned their screening positions entirely and charged directly at the incoming threats, using their own mass and firepower as a battering ram. It left the transports exposed for the duration of the engagement, naked, undefended, blind. If even one hunter-killer slipped through the charge, a transport would die. The Halberd surged forward, her old engines answering with a roar that resonated through every deck, and Drennick felt the ship respond with something that might have been eagerness, the deep structural hum of a warship doing what she was designed to do. Every weapon on the port side fired simultaneously: railguns, lances, point defense cannons repurposed to offensive mode. The 3 hunter-killers on the port side scattered under the concentrated barrage, and the Halberd plowed through their formation, her armored prow taking a glancing hit that sheared away a section of outer plating, but left the structural hull intact beneath. On the starboard side, the Ardent and the Keen fought together with the coordinated precision of 2 ships whose captains had been drilling formation combat in every spare moment of the past 3 weeks. Solis in the Ardent was aggressive, dangerously aggressive, Drennick thought, watching the tactical feed with his jaw tight, pushing her frigate directly between 2 hunter-killers, and firing into both at point-blank range. her ship's small frame dwarfed by the biological warships on either side. It worked. Both hunters veered away, one of them trailing fluid from a ruptured organ. But the Keen took a hit. A biological projectile struck her engine section square on, and Lieutenant Commander Marsh's ship went dark for 11 seconds. 11 seconds of no thrust, no weapons, no shields, no maneuvering, drifting through the engagement zone like a dead leaf. The Varath noticed. 2 hunter-killers broke from their evasive patterns and turned toward the Keen with the focused intent of predators, sensing a crippled animal. Keen report. Engines restarting, backup sequence running. We're coming back online. Ardent, cover the Keen. Now everything you have. Solis didn't hesitate. The Ardent threw itself between the Keen and the 2 closing hunters, interposing her entire hull as a physical shield, and for 90 seconds the frigate absorbed fire that would have torn the crippled ship apart. The Ardent's hull rang like a struck bell. Drennick could hear the sympathetic vibrations through the halberd's own hull sensors, sections of armor peeling away under the superheated biological rounds, atmosphere venting from a dozen micro-breaches. Then the Keen's engines fired, a ragged, stuttering burn that smoothed into something reliable, and Marsh pulled his ship clear. The 2 frigates retreated to the convoy screen together, battered and bleeding atmosphere but alive. Ardent damage report. Significant, Solis' voice calm. Impossibly calm for a 26-year-old whose ship had just been used as a punching bag. Port weapons offline, the mounts are physically gone. Hull integrity at 62%. We have atmosphere in the core sections. Engineering is stable. We're still here, Commander. We're still here. Those 3 words were becoming the convoy's prayer. 27 hours, 14 minutes. The pattern held through the long hours that followed. The Varath attacked in waves, 2 or 3 coordinated strikes per hour, each probing a different section of the convoy, each one incorporating lessons from previous attempts. By 1400, they had figured out the Ardent's reduced firepower and started targeting her position specifically, forcing Drennick to rotate the escorts more frequently and spread his already thin coverage even thinner. By 1600, they had learned to feint at one flank and strike at the other, using a sophistication that Drennick would have admired in any opponent he didn't want to kill. At 1623, they found the gap. 2 hunters dove at the convoy's ventral approach, the same angle they had used on Transport 9, and this time neither frigate could reach the interception point in time. Transport 4 died. The biological round hit her reactor section, and the ship didn't break apart, it detonated. The flash was bright enough to temporarily blind the halberd's optical sensors. 7,000 more people, 38,000 total dead in 10 hours. At 1700, a hunter-killer that had been circling at the edge of sensor range made a sudden run at Transport 7, the one carrying the school. Drennick had the halberd across its path before it closed to weapons range, and Vassara put 3 lance beams into its forward section that drove it off with a shudder and a trail of frozen biological matter. But the margin was less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds between the hunter's firing solution and the halberd's interposition. If the ship had been slower to turn by a heartbeat, 340 children would have died. Drennick didn't say anything after that engagement. He stood at his console and watched the tactical display and said nothing for 11 minutes while the Varath regrouped, and nobody on the bridge spoke to him, and nobody needed to. 23 hours, 41 minutes. The halberd was bleeding. Not metaphorically. The old ship was literally leaking atmosphere from 4 hull breaches that the skeleton damage control teams couldn't fully seal. Her port armor was gone in sections, the bare structural frame exposed to vacuum like ribs showing through torn skin. 2 of her 12 lance batteries had burned out from overuse, their emitters fused into slag. The railguns were still firing, but the magnetic coils were running hot, and Thomas reported that the overclock option was now only reliable for short bursts rather than sustained fire. But she was still there, still between the hunters and the families, still firing. 22 hours, 8 minutes. At 1847, the Varath changed tactics entirely. Instead of pack strikes against the convoy, 3 hunter-killers broke off from the main formation and positioned themselves directly ahead of the convoy's course, blocking the path to the Bastion Line. It was not a physical blockade. The transports could fly around them, but a psychological one. Civilian captains looked at 3 massive predatory warships sitting directly in their path, and their survival instincts screamed stop. The convoy began to slow. Transport captains, panicking, started to deviate from course, their ships drifting apart as each one tried to find a route that didn't point directly at a hunter-killer's open maw. All transports, this is Commander Drennick. His voice cut through every channel. Maintain course and speed. Do not deviate. The escorts will clear the path ahead. Repeat, maintain course. You follow the halberd's lights and you do not look at anything else. He switched to the military channel. Halberd will take point and break the blockade. Ardent and Keen fall in behind. Morrigan, hold the rear screen alone. Commander, Vasara said quietly from her station, if we leave the rear screen with only the Morrigan, the trailing transports, including 12, are exposed to the remaining 8 hunters. I know. He met her eyes across the darkened bridge. If the convoy stops or turns, we lose formation coherence. They pick us apart individually at leisure, transport by transport. The blockade is what breaks us, so the blockade goes. The halberd moved to the front of the convoy and accelerated toward the 3 waiting hunter-killers. Drennick ordered the railgun overclock engaged. The magnetic coils screamed, a high-pitched whine that carried through the hull plating and set teeth on edge, and the railguns fired at 15% above their rated capacity. Tungsten slugs hammered into the 3 hunters at a rate the Varath hadn't calibrated against. Pack Instinct 1. When the prey charges and hits harder than expected, pull back and reassess. The 3 blockade hunters peeled away to the flanks, and the convoy passed through the gap, and 27 transport captains breathed again. Behind them, the 8 remaining hunters made a run at the trailing transports. The Morrigan fought alone for 6 minutes, Captain Akaffer's rough, commanding voice crackling across the tactical channel as she directed her 4 working weapons against 2 diving hunters while 6 more circled at range. Transport 12, the slowest, the most vulnerable, the one with the coolant issue that still hadn't been fixed, took a grazing hit to her port side. The hull buckled inward but held. The transport's civilian captain reported structural deformation in the cargo bay, but no breach, no casualties, no loss of propulsion. 6 minutes alone against the pack. Then Drennick brought the halberd back around at full burn, and the hunters retreated to their orbiting pattern. Morrigan status. Akaffer's voice, 1 more weapon mount down, 3 of 8 now. But we held them, Commander. 19 hours, 44 minutes. The railguns burned out at 2200, earlier than Thomas had estimated. The overclock burst against the blockade had pushed the coils past their tolerance, and the sustained fire afterward finished them. Thomas reported it with the flat tone of a man delivering news he had already grieved for in advance. Magnetic coils are fused solid. I can attempt to rebuild on 2 of them if you give me 4 hours, a full machine shop we don't have, and a miracle I can't order. You have 4 hours. Skip the machine shop and the miracle. Do what you can. Understood, Commander. The halberd was now a lance-only warship. 10 working lance batteries out of the original 12, 2 already burned out, the rest showing heat fatigue that would only worsen. Against self-healing biological warships that adapted to every tactic within 2 engagements. Drennick sat in his command chair and did the arithmetic he had been postponing. 19 hours to the Bastion Line, 10 lances, 4 escorts, one of which, the Ardent, was at 62% hull with half her weapons physically missing, 8 hunter-killers still circling, plus the 3 from the blockade that had rejoined the pack, 11 predators, 27 transports carrying 302,000 surviving civilians. The numbers did not work. He knew it. Vasara knew it. Every officer on the bridge knew it, and they kept working because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant everyone died. At 2300, Drennick received a transmission from Transport 7. The school's headmistress, a woman named Calloway who had managed to get 340 children onto a cargo transport in the last 12 minutes before the Varath reached their colony, asked, in a voice that was steady in a way that only a person accustomed to holding things together for children could manage, whether they were going to make it to the Bastion Line. Drennick told her they were. She asked how he knew. He said because the halberd was between them and the hunters, and the halberd was not leaving. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My children can hear the impacts through the hull, Commander. They count them. The youngest ones think it's thunder." He didn't answer for several seconds. Then he said, "Tell them it is." He closed the channel and stared at the tactical display for a long time, watching the 11 Predator icons circle, and the flatness in his chest turned into something harder, something with edges, something that felt less like exhaustion and more like a decision being made in a place beyond words. "Commander," Vasara again, her voice carrying that particular quality of controlled dread. "The Varath are tightening their orbit. They're collapsing inward, all 11 consolidating into a single formation. Based on prior patterns, they're preparing a major coordinated strike." "How long?" 30 to 40 minutes. Drennick stood. He walked to the forward viewport, an actual viewport of reinforced transparent alloy, because the halberd was old enough to have been built before the Navy decided viewports were structural weaknesses, and sealed them over in newer designs. Through the thick glass, scratched and hazed from decades of micrometeorite impacts, he could see the convoy stretching out ahead, a ragged, fragile line of transport ships with their running lights blinking against the dark, and beyond them nothing. Stars, void, and somewhere out there, the Bastion Line. 19 hours, 302,000 people, and 11 hunters who had not lost a single member of the pack to his 4 battered ships. He turned back to the bridge. "Signal the Ardent, the Keen, and the Morrigan. Commander's conference, all captains, secure channel." The faces appeared on his display, small, compressed video feeds from 3 damaged warships. Solis, young and bruised, a clotted cut above her left eye from a console impact she hadn't taken time to treat. Marsh, the Keen's commander, pale and rigid, the skin around his eyes tight with the particular exhaustion of a man whose ship had died under him once already today. Akaffer, the Morrigan's captain, oldest of the 4, her face seamed with deep lines that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. "Here's where we stand," Drennick said. No preamble, no morale speech. They didn't need one, and he didn't have one to give. The halberd's railguns are gone. The Ardent is at 62% hull with reduced weapons. The Keen has intermittent engine failures and degraded sensors. The Morrigan has 3 working weapons out of 8. We have 19 hours to the Bastion Line, and the Varath are consolidating for their biggest push. He paused. None of them spoke. They already knew what he was going to say because they had all done the same arithmetic. "I'm going to take the halberd out of the convoy screen. I'm going to advance on the Varath formation directly, at full power, with everything the halberd still has. The goal is simple. I'm going to make myself the most dangerous and interesting thing in their field of vision. I'm going to make them deal with me instead of the transports." "Commander," Soli started. "The halberd draws the pack, all of it. You 3 hold the screen around the convoy and run. Push the transports to .35, force it if you have to. If Transport 12 can't keep up, distribute her passengers to the other ships and cut her loose. You have 19 hours. You make them count." Kale, Akaffer, using his first name, the way she had when they'd served together on the Blackwater siege 5 years ago. "The halberd can't survive alone against 11 of them. You know that. She doesn't have to survive. She has to be loud enough, mean enough, and stubborn enough to keep their attention for as long as possible. Every hour I hold them is an hour the convoy runs free." He looked at each of them in turn. This is what the halberd was built for. This is what I was put here to do. Let me do it. Silence on the channel. Then Marsh spoke, his voice thin but steady. How long do you think you can hold them? Thomas says the reactor will run. The lances will fire until they melt. This ship has taken everything 11 biological killing machines have thrown at her for 16 hours and she's still flying. I think the old girl has a few more rounds in her. Solis' jaw tightened visibly. Akefer closed her eyes for a long moment, then opened them. Marsh nodded once. The convoy will reach the Bastion Line, Solis said. It was not a hope. It was not a prediction. It was a promise extracted from the throat of a woman who understood exactly what it was going to cost. Drennick out. He closed the channel. The bridge crew had heard every word. The halberd's command bridge was too small for privacy, and Drennick hadn't tried for any. Ensign Korath was crying silently at his station, tears tracking down his face while his hands continued working the communications console without pause. Vassara was not crying. She was methodically reviewing her targeting solutions, adjusting priority sequences for maximum damage output with 10 lance batteries. Lieutenant, Drennick said, anyone who wants to transfer to the convoy transports has 30 minutes. No questions asked, no records kept, no judgment made. Pass the word to all sections. Vassara looked at him. And you, Commander? I'll be right here. The 30 minutes passed. 14 crew members transferred to the transports, most of them reservists, 2 of them veterans who had families on Transport 7. Drennick did not note their names and did not blame them and would not have accepted their apologies if offered. The remaining 340 stayed. They stayed because the halberd was their ship, because Drennick had never asked them to die, he had only ever asked them to fight. Because some decisions do not require an order, or a speech, or even a conversation. 17 hours, 51 minutes to the Bastion Line. 0 minutes to what came next. Helm, bring us about. Heading 090. Direct intercept course on the Verath formation. I, Commander, heading 090. Engineering, full military power. Everything the reactor can safely deliver, and then a little more. Full military power, I, Thomas says, and I'm quoting, give them hell, Commander. All lance batteries, weapons free. Continuous fire authorization. Pick your targets and make every shot count. The ISV halberd, 47 years old, scarred from 3 wars, her hull patched with mismatched plating, her railguns dead, her armor stripped in sections down to bare frame, turned away from the convoy she had protected for 16 hours, pointed her battered prow at 11 Verath hunter-killers, and accelerated. Drennick watched the range close on the tactical display. 50,000 kilometers, 40, 30. At 25,000, the Verath formation shifted, uncertain, breaking rhythm for the first time. A lone warship charging a pack of 11 hunters was not prey behavior. It was not anything in their evolutionary experience. Prey ran, prey hid, prey clustered together and tried to become small and invisible. This ship was getting bigger. 20,000 kilometers. The lances opened fire. 10 beams of coherent energy stabbed out across the dark, and this time Drennick did not spread the fire across multiple targets. All 10 lances converged on the nearest hunter-killer, pouring energy into a single point on its hull, the junction where Vassara had identified the growth seam vulnerability earlier. The hunter-killer's chitin boiled, plates shattered outward. The biological interior ruptured, organs exploding in vacuum, and the creature, because it was a creature, not a machine, a living thing that felt what was happening to it, convulsed. Its propulsion died. Its body split along a fracture line that ran from prow to stern. It went dark, drifting, dead. The first confirmed kill of the engagement. The pack had lost a member. The other 10 hunters reacted instantly. Pack behavior at its most primal. When a member of the pack is killed by prey, The pack either recognizes a superior threat and flees, or it converges to overwhelm the killer before it can kill again. The Varath did not flee. 10 hunter-killers turned toward the halberd and charged from every direction. Drennick smiled. It was not a happy expression. It was not meant to be. It was the expression of a man who had offered himself as bait and watched every predator in the field take it. Behind him, the convoy was already pulling away. The 3 escorts were pushing the transports to .35, squeezing speed from civilian engines that groaned under the demand. The gap between the halberd and the convoy widened every second, a growing void that the Varath would have to cross to reach the transports, a void guarded by a ship that had just killed one of them. Commander, 10 contacts inbound, closing from all quadrants, estimated engagement in 90 seconds. Maintain fire, cycle targets, keep them all hurt and all angry. The halberd fought. She fought the way old warships fight, not with elegance, not with precision targeting algorithms or automated countermeasure suites, but with the accumulated stubbornness of a hull that had been told it was obsolete 3 times and refused to agree. Her lances carved lines of fire across the hunters' hulls, finding seams and joints, burning through chitin and into the soft organs beneath. Her point defense systems, designed for missile interception, peppered the closest hunters with thousands of tiny kinetic rounds that did almost no structural damage but made the creatures flinch and dodge and lose their attack runs. The hunters hit back. Biological rounds slammed into the halberd from 6 directions simultaneously. Hull sections crumpled like paper. Decks 14 through 20 collapsed entirely, bulkheads folding inward under impacts they were never designed to absorb. The port lance battery cluster went dark, 3 emitters destroyed in a single hit, and then the dorsal array followed. Atmosphere vented from a dozen new breaches, the ship's remaining air hemorrhaging into vacuum. The lights on the bridge flickered, steadied, flickered again, and then half of them went out entirely. Hull integrity at 41%. Maintain fire. Drennick stood at his console and watched his ship die around him. Not in a burst, slowly, section by section, like an ancient structure losing walls in a siege. The outer hull was peeling away. The armor was gone. The structural frame was exposed, and the next hits would reach the armored core itself, the last shell around the bridge and engineering, and the 340 people who had stayed. But every second the halberd endured was a second the convoy gained. Every lance beam that forced a hunter to dodge or break its run was a moment the transports were not being hunted. Every minute was distance. Every minute was lives. The halberd killed her second hunter-killer 40 minutes into the solo engagement. Vassara found the seam again, the growth junction on the ventral side, and poured sustained fire from the remaining 7 lances into it at a range, so close the thermal bloom washed across the halberd's own hull. The creature convulsed, ruptured, and split. 2 kills. 9 hunters left. The halberd was missing half her hull. Commander, reactor temperature climbing. Thomas reports containment seals are showing strain. His estimate, his words, maybe 2 hours before I have to choose between scrubbing the reactor or losing the ship to a core breach. 2 hours. The convoy needed 17 more to reach the line. Tell Thomas to keep her running, whatever it takes. He says he knows, Commander. He says they all know. Between the second kill and the next assault, there was a lull, 14 minutes where the Varath circled wide and the halberd drifted on momentum, conserving power. Drennick used the time to walk the armored core, checking on his crew. In the cramped auxiliary fire control room, 4 technicians were manually routing targeting data through backup conduits because the main computer linkages had been severed by a hull strike. In the secondary medical station, 2 corpsmen were treating a petty officer whose suit had been punctured by internal shrapnel, a fragment of the ship's own hull plating, torn free by an impact and driven through a corridor wall into the woman's shoulder. She was conscious, and when Drennick asked her how she was, she said, "Still at my post, Commander. Sir, is the convoy clear?" He told her the convoy was running free, and she nodded once and closed her eyes, and the corpsman sealed her suit and injected a painkiller that would keep her conscious for another 6 hours. Drennick walked back to the bridge. He did not allow himself to count the empty stations he passed. The next hour was the worst of Drennick's life, and he had lived through the 4-day siege of Blackwater Station. The Varath, down 2 of their pack and wary now of the halberds' lances, became patient. They circled at range, firing from distance, wearing the cruiser down through attrition rather than risking close engagement. It was methodical, efficient, and devastating. The halberds' remaining armor ablated under the sustained barrage like ice under a blowtorch. 3 more lance batteries failed. Their emitters overheated and fused. Fires broke out on the lower decks, fed by atmosphere that the damage control teams couldn't contain, because there weren't enough of them to reach the fires. The gravity generators stuttered, failed, recovered, failed again. For 30 seconds the bridge crew floated in 0G before the backups kicked in with a grinding reluctance that suggested they wouldn't do it again. But the pack stayed focused on the halberd, not the convoy. The old cruiser was still the most dangerous thing in their perceptual field, the thing that had killed 2 of them, the thing that would not stop fighting, the thing that charged when it should have fled, and the Varath would not leave a wounded but still fighting prey behind them. Predator instinct demanded they finish what they started. Drennick understood Predator logic well enough to bank on it, and the knowledge was the ugliest comfort he had ever held. 14 hours to the Bastion Line, 16 hours since the halberd had turned to face the pack alone. "Commander, 2 of the hunters are breaking off from the formation. They're heading on a bearing toward the convoy's projected position." Drennick's blood went cold. Classification. The 2 smallest in the pack, scout-class hulls, they're faster than the others. 2 hunters heading for the convoy, 7 still circling the halberd. If even one reached the transports, thousands would die. Vasara, target the 2 breaking away. All remaining lances, priority 1. They do not reach that convoy. 4 surviving lances swiveled and fired. The beams reached out across the growing distance, coherence degrading with range but still potent enough to matter. 1 beam struck the trailing scout hunter across its rear quarter, finding a propulsion organ and burning through it. The creature shuddered, its acceleration faltering, and fell back crippled, unable to maintain pursuit speed. The second one kept going, accelerating, pulling away from the halberd's degrading effective range, growing smaller on the tactical display. "It's beyond effective engagement range, Commander. The lances can't maintain coherence at this distance." Drennick stared at the display. 1 hunter-killer heading for 302,000 people, and he could not reach it. "Signal the convoy, warn them. Tell Solis, tell all of them, 1 hunter incoming, scout class fast. Estimated arrival in approximately 3 hours at their relative velocity." He paused, jaw working. Then, "Tell Solis the Ardent knows what to do." The message went out on tight beam. The reply came back in text only from the Ardent. "Understood. We will be ready." 12 hours, 40 minutes to the Bastion Line. The crippled scout hunter had limped back to the pack. The fast one was a diminishing point on the long-range sensors. 7 hunters still circled the halberd. The ship was barely functional. 4 lance batteries operational out of 12. Hull integrity at 27%. The structural analysis showed more vacuum than hull in the ship's cross-section. Fires burned on 5 decks, contained only because there wasn't enough atmosphere left to feed them properly. The reactor was running hot, its containment seals weeping radiation into the engineering section at levels that would be lethal over hours. Thomas and his team were working in sealed suits now, their dosimeters climbing, performing maintenance in conditions that would kill them slowly even if the Varath didn't kill them fast. Drennick gave the order he had been holding in reserve since the engagement began. All crew, this is the commander. Seal helmets and transition to suit atmosphere. Prepare for sustained vacuum operations. The outer hull can no longer maintain reliable pressure in any section. 340 people sealed their suit helmets and continued working. The bridge crew did not look at each other. They looked at their consoles, at their targeting solutions, at the countdown display that Drennick had ordered posted on the main screen 6 hours ago, white numbers on black, ticking down to the moment the convoy would cross the Bastion Line. 12 hours, 11 minutes. At 200 the next morning, 22 hours and 13 minutes since the first wave, the Halberd killed her third hunter-killer. It was a brutal, close-range engagement that neither side had planned. The hunter had come in too close, too confident that the battered cruiser was finished, and had opened its ventral feeding aperture, the maw the Varath used to consume debris from their kills. Vassara saw the opening and fired every remaining lance directly into it. The beams burned through the creature's internals from the inside, and it died from within, a convulsion, a rupture along every growth seam, and then stillness. 3 kills, 8 hunters remained. The halberd had 4 working lances and a hull that was more vacuum than metal. "Commander," Thomas's voice through the suit radio, hoarse, slow with fatigue and the early symptoms of radiation exposure. "Reactor containment is an active failure. I can hold it for 4 hours, maybe 5 if I manually cycle the backup seals. After that, I have to scram the reactor or we lose the ship to an uncontrolled core event." 4 hours. The convoy needed 12 more. "Hold it as long as you can, Chief. Every minute you give me is minutes they run free." "I know, Commander, believe me." "We all know." 8 hours, 19 minutes. In the dark hours between 300 and 500, the Varath tested the halberd 17 times. Not full assaults, probing runs, single hunters darting in to fire 1 or 2 rounds and then pulling back, measuring response times, cataloging which lances could still track and which arcs were now blind. Drennick recognized the technique. It was what wolf packs did when the prey was cornered but still dangerous. They circled and nipped and waited for the moment the animal's head dropped. He refused to let the halberd's head drop. Every probe was answered with fire. Every darting run met with a lance beam sweeping across the hunter's path, forcing it to dodge, forcing it to respect the dying ship. Vassara's hands moved across her targeting console in a rhythm that had become almost mechanical, and Drennick realized she had stopped calculating shot solutions consciously. She was targeting by instinct now, the way a gunner does after enough hours of sustained combat, the body taking over where the mind would have failed from exhaustion. At 4:37, one of the probing hunters came in too shallow and caught a lance beam across its dorsal ridge. The hit didn't kill it, but it burned deep enough that the creature's movements became visibly labored, one of its propulsion organs trailing a continuous stream of dark fluid. The rest of the pack noted the injury and adjusted, and for 20 minutes no hunter came within lance range. The Varath made their final coordinated assault at 600. All 8 remaining hunters converged simultaneously from every approach vector, above, below, port, starboard, fore, aft, and 2 oblique angles that caught the halberd's 4 surviving lances in a crossfire where they could only track 4 of the 8 targets. It was the most sophisticated pack attack of the engagement, and the halberd had nothing left to answer it with. The first hit took out the last dorsal lance in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The second opened the bridge to vacuum, the forward viewport, the reinforced transparent alloy that Drennick had looked through every day for 6 years, shattered inward in a spray of crystallized atmosphere and razor fragments. Emergency blast shutters slammed down with a force that shook the deck, but not before the decompression surge tore 2 crew members from their seats. Their magnetic boots held barely, and they hauled themselves back to their consoles with bleeding hands. The halberd rolled, her remaining engines fighting to maintain attitude control against asymmetric thrust from damaged propulsion. Drennick tasted blood in his helmet. He had bitten through his own tongue during the impact. The two surviving lances fired continuously, sweeping across the hunters in desperate arcs, not doing enough damage to kill, but enough to sting, to flinch, to buy seconds. Hull integrity at 9%. Commander, the structural analysis says the halberd is still here, Drennick said through the blood in his mouth. She's still here, we're still here. Maintain fire. 7 hours, 2 minutes. The hunters pulled back, not because the halberd had driven them off, because they were confused. The ship should have been dead. By every metric their biological instincts calibrated against, a prey animal this damaged should have stopped moving, stopped fighting, gone still, and accepted the end. But it hadn't. It kept firing its two remaining weapons. It kept turning toward them. It kept being loud and defiant and stubborn. The Varath circled at distance, and Drennick watched them on the flickering tactical display, powered by backup batteries now, the main systems dead, and he understood something with the absolute clarity that only comes at the far edge of endurance. They were afraid, not of the halberd's weapons, not of the damage the dying cruiser could still inflict. They were afraid because the ship would not stop, and in their predator calculus, millions of years of evolution shaped around the simple equation of predator and prey. A thing that would not stop fighting even as it died was something they did not have a category for. A category error, the one thing a predator's instincts cannot process. The reactor scrammed at 8:14. Thomas held it together for an hour and 14 minutes longer than his estimate, nursing failing seals with manual overrides and raw stubbornness. And when the containment finally crossed the point of no return, he performed an emergency shutdown sequence that saved the ship from a core breach but killed the engines, the weapons, and every system except battery-powered life support and the communications array. The ISV halberd went dark, drifting, silent, a wreck in all but name. 5 hours, 41 minutes to the Bastion Line. The convoy was ahead, still running, still alive. 27 transports, 302,000 people, 3 escorts, the Ardent, the Keen, the Morrigan, guarding them with everything they had left. The 8 hunters circled the dead ship. They did not attack. For 20 minutes, they circled in the wide, patient orbit of predators, assessing whether the prey was truly finished, and Drennick sat in the dark on his dead bridge and listened to the sound of his own breathing inside his helmet and waited. Then they turned, all 8 of them simultaneously shifting to a pursuit heading toward the convoy. "Signal the convoy," Drennick said into the silence. 8 hunters inbound plus the scout that broke off earlier, 9 total, estimated intercept in approximately 4 hours. His voice was steady. It had nothing left in it but the truth. Tell them the halberd held the pack for 22 hours. Tell them every minute from here is theirs. The message went out on battery power, a thin whisper of radio energy crossing the void. The reply came not from the convoy. It came from the Bastion Line itself. A signal so powerful it overrode every frequency, broadcast on every band, carried by transmitters built into orbital defense platforms that had been silent for 17 days, silent and waiting. Bastion Line command to all Terran vessels. The minefield is active. The orbital batteries are charged and targeting. The 7th fleet has arrived from core systems, 43 warships in formation, including the dreadnought Iron Covenant. All civilian transports proceed to the Line AT maximum speed. All VERATH contacts will be engaged and destroyed beyond the line perimeter. Commander DRENNICK, ISV Halberd, hold your position. Rescue elements are en route to your coordinates. The 7th fleet sends its regards. Drennick read the message twice on the dim battery-powered display. Then he read it again. The 7th Fleet, 43 warships, the fleet that had been fighting on the far side of the core, the one nobody had heard from in weeks, the one everyone had written off, including a dreadnought, the Iron Covenant, 4 kilometers of armored purpose that made the halberd look like a patrol launch. On the tactical display, degraded to basic electromagnetic returns now, barely functional, Drennick watched the Varath hunter-killers slow. They had detected the 7th Fleet's approach. 8 hunters plus 1 scout against 43 warships, and a minefield and orbital batteries was not a hunt. It was the opposite of a hunt. The pack turned, all 9 moving away from the convoy, away from the Bastion Line, accelerating hard toward open space. Running, for the first time in the entire Varath migration, the hunters were prey. The convoy crossed the Bastion Line at 1347. 27 transports, 302,000 survivors, plus the passengers from the scout that Solis and the Arden had intercepted and destroyed 3 hours earlier. A story Drennick would hear later, how a 26-year-old captain in a frigate at 62% hull had rammed a hunter-killer head-on and lived to file the report. A rescue corvette reached the Halberd 2 hours after the convoy crossed. By then, Drennick had removed his helmet, breathed the thin emergency atmosphere that the battery-powered carbon scrubbers were barely maintaining, and sat in his chair in the dark, looking at nothing. 326 of his crew were alive. 14 had transferred to the transports. 12 were dead, 6 from hull breaches, 3 from uncontained fires, 2 from decompression events, 1 from a catastrophic console failure. 2 more were in critical condition in the sealed medical bay, breathing suit air because the medical section had lost pressure 4 hours ago. The corvette's captain, a young lieutenant who looked at the Halberd through his viewport and couldn't speak for several seconds, asked Drennick if he could walk. He said yes. He lied. His legs had gone numb from 22 hours in the command chair, and when he stood, he collapsed. Vassara caught him. She did not say anything. She put his arm over her shoulder and walked him to the airlock, her own steps unsteady but certain. As they crossed from the Halberd to the corvette through the docking tube, Drennick looked back through the airlock viewport. The old ship hung in the void, dark and still, her hull torn open in a dozen places, her armor stripped to bare frame, her weapons cold and dead. She looked like a wreck. She looked like something that had no right to still be in one piece. 22 hours against 11 Varath hunter-killers, 3 confirmed kills, 38,000 civilians lost, and 302,000 saved. The number would never be enough. It could never be enough. 25,000 names he would carry until he stopped breathing. But 302,000 people were alive on the other side of the Bastion Line, because a 47-year-old cruiser and her crew had refused to stop fighting. Drennick did not look away from the Halberd until the airlock sealed shut between them.